Amongst the icons and relics, a ragged copy of the Crusader's Creed. A helm of the Crusaders, their legions lost, their exploits legend. A standard of battle, worn ragged by time, travel, and tumult. A cache of religious valuables. The Crusade passed through these parts. The Crusaders were known to cache their spoils, that the poor might share in their conquests. The vestiges of an invading army, scattered and lost in this dying land. The sword calls out to the swordsman. The last of the Crusaders will be found. The word of the light will call forth the faithful. This gibbering creature knew not the value of his stock. The blade is a beacon. The blade bristles upon our coach. The lost night must be near. After uncountable seasons, the humiliated warlord has made good his vendetta. A mighty sword arm anchored by humility and compassion. The last of his kind. He'll retire his battered helm atop a scarecrow and labor the land beneath its baleful gaze. Her sword upon the mantle, she will seek meaning beyond the blade. Metal and man, soldier and sword, forged in the fires of war. Perfection glints wicked along the rapier's edge. Feared by many, known by none. Perhaps he will find his way home. Outmatched at last. The final parry came too late. The sounds of soldiery carry upon the wind. Displaced, but not disarmed. The faceless army awaits us. The war is lost, yet the warlord fights on. His axe demands tribute. His soul demands suffering. A titan of rusted metal, a juggernaut of death and dismemberment. Crusader, Chapter 1. Labor the land. Autumn's inexorable march was underway, and the race was on to save the harvest from the first frost. Despite his exertions, their yield was paltry. Come winter, starvation would seat itself at the head of their table. Chapter 2. Hard Pressed. The banners of the Holy Army snapped in the biting wind that scoured his barren plot. Taking the quill from the attending officer, he signed his name crudely upon the weathered scroll. He had no love of violence, but his absence would stay famine's hand. He accepted both tabard and blade, bid his wife and son a stoic farewell, and rode out reluctantly to make war. Chapter 3. The Great Crusade. The cacophony of conflict rang bloody in his ears. Trumpets and drums shouted orders, the screams of the dead and the dying. But in the maelstrom of mortal combat, he found a divine peace. He came to relish the cleaving blade and zealous bloodlust, losing himself entirely to the terrible delights of battle. Chapter 4. Blood in the Snow. The enemy camp rang with the clamor of terrified recognition. They knew his frightful reputation. At the moment of execution, he demurred. This one could live on in humiliation, a mockery of the mercy his enemies knew he did not possess. Chapter 5. No home but hell. Motionless upon his warhorse, he contemplated the scene of stifling domesticity in the familiar valley below. The boy played idly in the muddy field while the mother hung sheets upon a tattered line. From his saddle, he planted his heraldic banner in the thawing soil, tossing the whole of his earnings in its shadow. He blew hard into his war horn and turned to rejoin his regiment. He did not look back. Duelist. Chapter 1. Academy Duello. She would wake before dawn, stretch, meditate, and portion her food with exacting care. The academy expected discipline, but she sought to exceed it, shunning the earnest social overtures of her peers in favor of training exhaustively, long into the twilight. She did not grieve this isolation. Perfection demanded sacrifice. Chapter 2. After Hours. Beneath her doublet, a swelling desire to go beyond her instructor's expectations, to earn his respect, and perhaps his attention. Nimble and sure-footed, her flawless form drew his notice. Chapter 3. Insatiable. Under more direct tutelage, she blossomed, a formidable fighter, fastidious in the extreme, and possessed of a ruthless single-mindedness. It was this absence of fear that gave her an uncanny edge. Between instructor and pupil, the intimacy of martial respect boiled over into a simmering entanglement, and soon, long hours of drills regularly culminated in amorous clashes, as fierce as any rencontre. Chapter 4. A Taste of Victory. In the afterglow of their exertions, playful teasing gave rise to a contest of skill. She had done as he trained her to do, flawlessly and without hesitation. Chapter 5. The Perfection. As she slid her blade free of her fallen lover, the purity of her pursuit shivered through her veins. Sport was an unacceptable abstraction. The true test of skill lay in contest to the death. She whispered tender thanks to him for this final posthumous lesson, then threw his cape over her shoulder. Hers would be a life steeped in violent hazard until she found an opponent worthy of spilling her blood.